See how long it is sustained.
And with me this morning, Liberal frontbencher Senator Mitch Fifield and Labor frontbencher Andrew Leigh. Gentlemen, good morning to you, Andrew. First to you, I know you supported Julia Gillard right to the end, but was Labor right to go to Mr Rudd given the polls of the last couple of days?
Well, certainly, Kieran, I think you've seen that the government has a sense of energy about it, and that's because of the set of policies we've been pursuing. There is a great reform agenda that we will be going to the Australian people to talk about, from disability...
Was Labor right to change to Kevin Rudd now, do you think? Or I know you backed Gillard to the end, but given what you've seen and given this energy that you talk about, was it the right move?
These are questions historians will pick over, Kieran. My view is that we have a fantastic set of policies, and I'm going to be campaigning enthusiastically with Kevin Rudd to make the case for continuing the reform agenda.
Are you happy to be Parliamentary Secretary to a Prime Minister that you didn't vote for? Because that's your current job, isn't it?
In politics, you do whatever job the leader asks you to do. I'm certainly somebody who's never criticised Kevin Rudd. I think he served as a terrific Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, and he is passionate about these important reforms. Something like the NBN is a big Labor reform which is at risk in the election.
The NBN, which will have Anthony Albanese taking responsibility for the National Broadband Network and communications along with his infrastructure responsibilities. Let's go to Senator Fifield. Is the Liberal Party a bit worried by this, or do you think that the poll bounce is just a sugar hit?
Well, Kieran, we've always said that winning elections isn't easy. That to win from opposition is like climbing Mount Everest, and we've always said that the polls would tighten. It seems that there was only one side of politics who thought that the election was a foregone conclusion, and that was the other side. But we've always known that this will be difficult.
I've got to interrupt you there, Senator Fifield. Kevin Rudd, the Prime Minister. Let's cross there live. And let's go back to our panel now to go through the announcements by Kevin Rudd. Much of it known before the formal announcement there in Newcastle of his new ministry. Some other details that emerge. We've got Senator Mitch Fifield and Labor MP Andrew Leigh with me this morning. Andrew, first of all, I want to go to your job. You were the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, but you're no longer. Kevin Rudd said when he took the job that people who wanted to stay where they were could if they wanted to, but you've been demoted. Why is that?
Well, Kieran, I told the Prime Minister I was willing to serve, but that if he needed my resignation in order to build the team around him he most wanted, then I was happy to give that to him. I thought that was the ethical thing to do in the circumstances. Kevin Rudd's accepted that, and he's also asked me to play a role advising him on international economic issues, which I'm very happy to do. I think this is a challenging economic time for Australia.
Not retribution because you voted for Julia Gillard?
No, look, I think the Prime Minister has chosen a team around him that he thinks is what he wants to lead him to the election, and I wanted to give him full flexibility in doing that. It's a short period to the election, and this is an election where a lot is at stake for Australia. I think it's vital that we're out there, all of us, making the case for the great Labor reforms and the risks to Australian economy. I mean, the British Conservatives put their economy back into recession with their savage austerity. That could easily happen here. Tony Abbott could put us back in recession.
Mr Rudd was playing down the fact that it might be a gender issue. He says he doesn't see things through the prism of gender. But 3 additional women into the cabinet, the biggest female representation in a ministry in Australian history. Surely, is that not, at least in part, some politics there to try and, I suppose, counter a negative reaction to Labor dumping Australia's first female Prime Minister?
I'm very happy to go to each of those people and talk to you, Kieran, about why they're incredibly strong ministers and will make great additions to Cabinet. Melissa Park is one of the strongest activists on foreign aid.
She's in the Army Ministry, though. She's not in there.
Well, you're talking about the women who've been promoted. I think Melissa is first rate. I think Julie Collins is a terrific minister who understands back to front issues on affecting the status of women in her current portfolio and is razor sharp when it comes to picking up on new issues.
OK, let's look at some of the other key portfolios like immigration. Tony Burke moves into that. He was a strong supporter of Julia Gillard right throughout. He's been moved into this key portfolio. Is that a sign from Kevin Rudd that he's willing to let bygones be bygones, that he wants to bring in some of the Gillard camp, or is that simply the best person for the job?
Well, as I recall, this was a portfolio that Tony held when we were in opposition. He understands the issues well. His seat is one of the most diverse in Australia, and Tony recognises the importance of striking a regional solution on asylum seeker flows. He's somebody who's used to working collaboratively and internationally, and maybe he's the person who can bring the opposition over the line to back the Houston panel recommendations.
He and Mark Butler both now very much at the front and centre of the political debate, two of the younger and better performers within the Labor Party. Senator Fifield, I want to go to you on this. Your reaction to that front bench that you'll be facing in the lead up to an election which looks like it's going to be, well, a lot more competitive than it looked a couple of weeks ago.
Well, firstly, commiserations to Andrew. I don't think that Kevin Rudd can afford to lose the contribution of people with the talent that Andrew has. So, sorry, mate. But I think Kevin Rudd really summed things up in his opening comments, where he said that when he was first Prime Minister and was facing the global financial crisis, he had to learn on the job. That's something that isn't going to be the case if we're successful at the next election. Tony Abbott has been a long-serving minister. He won't have to learn on the job. There are large numbers of former ministers in his cabinet. They won't have to learn on the job. There are people like Kelly O'Dwyer, Tony Smith and myself who've served in senior positions in Treasurer's offices. We won't have to learn on the job. And that's the issue, that after this government have been in office for almost 6 years, they're still learning on the job. They're still coming to grips with it. And I don't take any comfort from some of the appointments like Chris Bowen as Treasurer. Yes, the Prime Minister is right, Chris Bowen is a good guy, but you need a strong person to be Treasurer of the country. And Chris Bowen showed that when he was Immigration Minister, he could not stand up to Julia Gillard and say, you're pursuing the wrong policies, turn round, go back. You need a strong person as Treasurer, and I don't have any confidence that he or Kevin Rudd have a plan for how to start paying back our debt.
One of the elements that we've mentioned this morning is this greater representation of women on the front bench. Mr. Rudd was asked about it. Let's play you a little of what he had to say.
This is a strong team. I'm proud to lead this team. This team has been selected on the basis of merit. I'm delighted that in this cabinet of ours we'll have the largest number of women of any cabinet in Australia's history. This is a very strong team. Penny Wong at the head of it, and so many others with her as well. I've mentioned before, of course, Jenny. I've mentioned also before, of course, Tanya, joined by 3 new women ministers as well. This will be a great contribution to the cause of women as well as the cause of good government in Australia.
Senator Fifield there, you heard it, a record number of women on the front bench. You'd welcome that, wouldn't you? That's a good development.
Well, look, the way that this Prime Minister and the previous Prime Minister have approached appointments to the ministry is basically ultimately everyone gets a go. About 2/3 of the caucus have served as ministers at some point. So basically everyone takes a number and eventually they get a turn. That's not how a cabinet and a ministry should be appointed. It should always be appointed on the basis of merit. We've got this situation where turn up and eventually you'll have a go. It's not good enough.
I'm just going through some of the details of this ministry as well. It looks like the Canberrans have done something to Mr. Rudd, because Kate Lundy's been dropped as Sports Minister as well to make way for Don Farrell.
Well, certainly Kevin Rudd will make his decisions according to what he thinks is the best team around him. I know Kate's a strong and passionate campaigner for Labor causes, and that's really what's at stake here, Kieran. There are 2 competing party visions. We can get caught up in the personalities, or we can remember that fundamentally what's at stake at this election is whether or not we engage in conflict with Indonesia over the opposition's wacky turn back the boats policy, whether the economy is driven into recession over their savage austerity, and whether the national broadband network gets built or not. I mean,
well, Anthony Albanese, for our viewers that haven't caught up with that, Anthony Albanese will take communications and the national broadband network responsibility, so he'll be prosecuting that case up against Malcolm Turnbull. I said Kate Lundy's has been moved out of sport. She's still a minister, though, going through the details here. Minister for Multicultural Affairs as well as Minister Minister assisting industry for industry and innovation. Don Farrell is the new Minister for Sport and continues to assist the Minister for Tourism. Now, another announcement this morning, another resignation. Simon Crean's going to quit politics. This is Mr Rudd responding to that.
I would also like to acknowledge here publicly as Prime Minister of Australia how much I value his work over the years. He has been an extraordinary leader in our movement for a long period of time. He has worked in previous Australian Labor governments. He has worked prior to that as head of the Australian trade union movement. He played an extraordinary role in fashioning the Accord and bringing our industrial relations system kicking and screaming into the 21st century. I acknowledge his contributions. In the period that I was Prime Minister, also a fantastic Minister for Trade. And certainly under Prime Minister Gillard, he's performed well in regional Australia, where in the regions they love him. They really do.
And so Simon Crean, another experienced person who's calling it a day. There's been quite a loss of a loss of intellectual capital, hasn't there, with all these resignations and political experience?
Simon Crean is a great loss to the Parliament, I agree, Kieran. He's had 20 years in Parliament, but more like 40 years in public life when you take into account his time in the trade union movement. I'm sure I'm not the only one in the caucus who has greatly valued his wise counsel.
Doesn't it reflect badly on the government, though, that you're losing all this talent? Combet, Crean, and the likes of Smith retiring as well at the election?
I think what's so strong about this, Kieran, is when you look at the talent that's able to come up. People like Ed Husick, who is ready to roll on issues of broadband, who I suspect will be out there pointing out that the only promise you can believe about Tony Abbott is that broadband speeds will always be slower under a coalition government.
All right. Senator Fifield, quickly to you, and finally, before we wrap up our discussion, Alexander Downer joining me in just a moment from Adelaide. But Senator Fifield, this poll bounce that we've seen for Kevin Rudd, he's got a 14-point lead over Mr Abbott now as preferred Prime Minister. I know you said that you always thought it wasn't going to be easy, but this has made it very competitive again. Do you concede that?
Look, Australian federal elections are always competitive. They're never one-sided races, and we're going to have to fight hard to earn the trust of the Australian people. But I think it's very important for the voting public to recognise that with the departure of Simon Crean, the last adult has left the government. It's a case of, with the last grown-up who leaves the building, switch out the lights as they go. There isn't depth, there isn't experience. This is a government without a plan, and we didn't hear from the Prime Minister today that he has a plan for the nation, a plan to repay the debt, a plan to stop the votes.
It would be remiss of me if I didn't ask you as well, today being July 1 and the rollout of the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the trial sites begin today. It will be 6 years in the making before it's fully rolled out, but there's 26,000 people that are going to be affected with these trial sites. This is a big day, isn't it, for policy, and not just this government, it is bipartisan, I know.
Look, it's a big day, and the NDIS represents the way the Parliament should work. I was in Geelong yesterday with a lot of people with disabilities. There's a great deal of excitement. They've had to wait a long time for the better deal that they deserve. There's still a lot of work to do, but today is a good start.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Fifield. Andrew Leigh, appreciate it. We're going to cross